There's a prevailing belief in the keto and low carb community that high LDL cholesterol doesn't matter as long as you're metabolically healthy or on a keto diet. In many ways, it functions kind of like a permission slip. Go ahead, load up on butter, bacon, and ribeyes. After all, you're in ketosis, as if that magically turns saturated fat into a health food. Well, a new study dropped recently. It was titled Plaque Begets Plaque, ApoB Does Not, Longitudinal Data from the Keto-CTA Trial. It was published a few months ago in the Journal of American College of Cardiology Advances. And on the surface, it seemed kind of like a lifeline for our low-carb brothers and sisters who are tired of hearing their cardiologists say, your LDL is too high. Oh, those pesky fear-mongering cardiologists, how dare they question the sanctity of steak and eggs. The study was spearheaded by none other than Nick Norwitz and other prominent keto advocates. And I've got to say, Nick's pretty jacked. Seriously. But please, let's not get distracted. This study was unfortunately not about his biceps and ripped six-pack. It was about plaque. And make no mistake, it looks like it was designed to reassure the keto community that high LDL in the context of a keto diet isn't dangerous. But here's the kicker. It didn't. In fact, it showed the exact opposite. Oh, and the authors tried to hide the results. Cue the intro. Now, what was the study trying to show? The Keto-CTA trial set out to answer a specific clinical question. Can metabolically healthy people on long-term ketogenic diets, despite having sky-high LDL and ApoB, avoid plaque progression? To explore this, the researchers tracked 100 individuals for 12 months using coronary CT angiography, a high-resolution method that quantifies plaque buildup inside your arteries. The idea behind this study was quite simple. Maybe not all LDL cholesterol is harmful. If someone's lean, insulin sensitive, with low triglycerides and inflammation, perhaps their elevated cholesterol doesn't carry the same cardiovascular risk. Given just how common it is for keto dieters to see their LDL levels spike while subjectively feeling healthier, this is a question many in the low-carb world are eager to answer. Now, who were these participants? Here's the catch/interesting part. This wasn't your average keto crowd. To qualify, participants had to meet exceptionally strict criteria, including at least 2 years on a ketogenic diet, an LDL cholesterol greater than 190 milligrams per deciliter with a 50% increase from their pre-keto baseline. And beyond their cholesterol, everything else had to be perfect. HDL cholesterol greater than 60, triglycerides less than 80, HbA1c less than 6, fasting glucose less than 110, CRP less than 2, blood pressure less than 130 on 80, no history of diabetes, thyroid, or kidney disease. These weren't just healthy individuals, they were metabolic outliers specifically chosen to test the hypothesis under the most favorable conditions possible. Now, here's where the first concern arises. Due to this rigorous screening process, it took years to enroll just 100 participants. Yet the study never reports how many were screened or excluded, which is critical for understanding how selective this group actually was. Without that critical information, we're left assuming these 100 were the healthiest of the healthy amongst those with diet-induced LDL elevation, which leads to a serious limitation, the external validity of this study. If your cohort represents this niche subgroup of ultra-healthy individuals, then any conclusions drawn from it cannot be generalized to the broader low-carb population, especially the majority who likely have less than perfect metabolic health. Before we dive into the results, there's also a major issue with how this study was framed. Despite being called the Keto-CTA trial, this wasn't actually a trial in the formal clinical research sense. In medicine, a trial implies an interventional study with randomization, control groups, and variable manipulation to establish causality. This study had none of that. It was purely an observational cohort study and even initially listed as such. Researchers simply followed a pre-selected group of extremely healthy, high cholesterol individuals on a keto diet over 12 months to see how their plaque progressed. This distinction matters. Observational studies can generate hypotheses, but they cannot determine cause and effect. So branding it as a trial not only overstates its rigor, it risks misleading readers about what the data can and cannot tell us. This isn't just academic nitpicking, it really affects how the public and general media interpret these results. Now, what were the researchers interested in? What was the primary outcome they were measuring? It was non-calcified plaque volume, or NCPV. Essentially, as the name implies, this is the total amount of plaque that is not calcified in the artery wall, which can be measured with a CT angiogram and modern software like Clearly, which is an AI tool that was used in this study. It is this soft plaque that is unstable and prone to bleeding, leading to adverse cardiovascular effects. By doing a baseline and then a 12-month scan, they were essentially trying to see how much this plaque increased by. We know this is what they were originally trying to measure because it was the pre-registered primary outcome on clinicaltrials.gov. The secondary outcome was percent atheroma volume, which is the plaque burden relative to the total artery volume. It standardizes for vessel size, allowing for a potentially better comparison between individuals. So that begs the question, how much did these values increase by? Well, it was initially hard to know because despite being the primary outcome, the published paper provided no numerical data on this. I'll repeat that. The primary pre-registered outcome of the paper, the change in non-calcified plaque volume, was not mentioned anywhere in the study. Not in the abstract, not in the results, nowhere. They did provide this figure which shows an increase, but is relatively ambiguous as to the extent of the increase. It was only when they were pressed by clinicians on social media that the primary author revealed the missing number. 18.8 millimeters cubed over 1 year. Now, here's the challenge. Because this wasn't an interventional study, we have no control group to compare this 18.8 millimeter cubed increase in non-calcified plaque volume against. The mean change was even larger, by the way, 31.5 millimeters cubed, which took even longer to come out. Like I said, there's no parallel group of keto dieters with normal LDL, no placebo arm, so we can't directly assess whether the LDL elevation was responsible for this progression. It also makes it hard to assign statistical or clinical significance to the raw number alone. So what can we do? The only workaround is to compare this figure to other cohorts of existing studies. While it's not ideal, it may help give us some perspective. So for comparison, we can use this Nature CT study published in the American Heart Journal, which used the Clearly AI software as well. This one wasn't as selective, but just looked at natural plaque progression in healthy populations on serial CTCA. They reported an annualized median change of 4.9 millimeters in non-calcified plaque. So essentially, the group of people in this study who were extremely healthy but just had a sky-high LDL cholesterol saw 4 times the rate of plaque progression of a healthy population with less strict inclusion criteria. Furthermore, there's other studies like this Keto-CTA study where non-diabetic patients with non-obstructive coronary atherosclerosis experienced NCPV regression with optimal medical therapy alone, a reduction in 21.3 millimeters cubed, or optimal medical therapy with the DASH diet with a reduction of negative 51.3 millimeters cubed. So for context, healthy people without sky-high LDLs experience much slower plaque progression, and those on medical therapy and an ideal DASH diet actually show reversal of plaque progression. So the results from this study are not stable by any means. Now, some people may push back, saying we shouldn't be comparing non-calcified plaque volume between subjects. We should use the secondary outcome percent atheroma volume instead. And when we do that, we see a similar story. In this study, the baseline percent atheroma volume was 1.6%, and the median change in percent atheroma volume for subjects was 0.8%. In other words, within a year, the volume grew by approximately 50%. Again, we don't have context, so we must just compare to other study. In this case, let's use the paradigm trial. As you can see, this quote-unquote perfect group that is metabolically healthy with no risk factors besides from an isolated increase in LDL cholesterol has a significantly higher annualized increase in percent atheroma volume compared to high-risk patients in the paradigm trial and significantly higher compared to lower risk. Respectfully, this is not stable plaque. Now let's take a closer look at what the authors show and how they manipulate the variables to paint a more reassuring picture than what the data justifies. In this results, they show a graph showing ApoB levels versus a change in total plaque score, arguing there's no correlation. The implication that even with high ApoB, plaque didn't necessarily progress, therefore ApoB may not be the culprit. But there's two concerns with this. Firstly, ApoB wasn't the pre-registered exposure variable, LDL cholesterol was. Shifting focus post hoc to ApoB, especially when it wasn't the planned independent variable, raises concerns about selective reporting. Secondly, and perhaps more importantly, everyone in this study had high ApoB. That was part of the inclusion criteria. You needed to have hyperlipidemia to enter the study. When every participant shares the same exposure, there's no meaningful variation to analyze. You can't expect to see a correlation if your data set is locked within a narrow range. It's a textbook case of range restriction. Imagine doing a study where everyone smokes. So some people smoke 20 cigarettes a day, others smoke 25 cigarettes a day, and then concluding that smoking doesn't cause lung cancer because the rates are similar between those that smoke 20 a day and those that smoke 25 a day. That would be absurd. To determine whether smoking causes lung cancer, you need to compare smokers and non-smokers. The exact same logic applies here. If you want to see whether ApoB drives plaque progression, you need to compare individuals with high ApoB to those with normal levels. This study didn't do that, so its conclusion that ApoB does not beget plaque isn't just unconvincing, it's scientifically unsound. Instead, what this study ended up doing was reframing the focus to predictors of plaque progression, so essentially baseline plaque versus these ApoB levels. The study basically ended up showing that your baseline coronary artery score was strongly correlated with this change in non-calcified percent atheroma volume. What the authors appear to be doing here is diverting your attention away from the actual magnitude of plaque progression, which was the pre-registered primary outcome. Instead, they shift the narrative towards this post-hoc finding that baseline plaque predicted future plaque growth, which they call plaque begets plaque. This type of post hoc reframing is a textbook example of outcome switching. And it's a serious red flag, especially when the primary outcome doesn't align with the author's expectations. It raises the concern that the investigations were anticipating minimal plaque progression, and when the results showed the opposite, they chose to downplay these findings and highlight a different, unregistered storyline. This selective emphasis undermines scientific transparency. Is this kind of thing that peer reviewers are supposed to catch, but in this case, it slipped through. If you are interested, I have made another video about cholesterol as well. It's about Paul Saladino, who's a carnivore dieter, and his misconceptions regarding dietary cholesterol, saturated fat, and heart disease. You can check it out here. There's also some links on useful articles or / critiques on this study linked in the description if you want to have more information on that. I'll see you in the next video.